Well, welcome everybody to episode 7 of the Vintage Spotlight podcast. Here it is November 26th. My name is Jeremy Lee. I'm joined by my partner on the Vintage Spotlight, Leighton Sheldon. Leighton, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great, Jeremy. How are you?
I am doing great. I'm excited for this episode, really excited. It's been a bit of a period of time since we've done one of these. I'm so happy to be back here in the studio with you, and I'm really excited about our guest tonight. I've had him on other podcasts before on Sports Cards Live, but this guy has been an inspiration to me. He's a wonderful collector. He's a sharpshooter of a collector, and I respect that approach so much. He goes by Matty C Collection on Instagram. Let's bring him out. Let's bring him out right away. Matt, how you doing, bud? How are you today?
I'm good, brother. How you doing?
I'm good. Excited to have you on the Vintage Spotlight with myself and Leighton here tonight or today. And listen, really want to pick your brain on a few things because you have what I would call a very sophisticated approach to the hobby. You are a very savvy collector, and you're someone who has influenced me in many ways, along with a couple of other key people in my hobby history and experience. And I think you tie right into this episode. So let's jump in, Leighton. Let's jump into this. And we're going to start by talking about the 1933 Gaudi number 149 Babe Ruth that just sold last Thursday on the Fanatics Collect platform. And I'm going to pull it up right now, guys. It's this card right here. And you can see this card sold for $1,620,000. If you are listening to this on podcast, feel free to check out the YouTube channel for Vintage Spotlight to see all the cards that we're going to be featuring and talking about. It might help enhance your experience. But if not, have fun listening, everybody. But Leighton and Matt, we're going to talk about this card right now. And the first question I'm going to pose is to you, Leighton, because this is going to be a question that might throw people for a curveball. But Leighton, do you think that this card should have sold for more than $1.62 million?
I'm going to answer it like this. It could have sold for more. Should have is a very powerful sentiment. And I think that it's a little bit more appropriate to say it could have sold for more. What I mean by that is, and I'm curious what you two gentlemen think as well, you're talking about one of the greatest cards ever produced in the hobby. It is one of the 4 Gaudi Ruths. It's a pop 3, none higher. So for all intents and purposes, does it matter if it's an 8.5 or a 9? Meaning the price could really just act like a 9. And so when this card first came up for auction, I thought it had the ability, the chance to sell for north of $2 million. So it's not as if it's sold for peanuts. 1.62 is a very solid price. But if someone said to me it sold for 2.27, would any of us here have been shocked? I'm curious of your thoughts.
I would not have been shocked at all if it sold for more than that. It is one of the 3 highest graded of this card in a PSA slab that exists on Earth. So no, this is one of those cards where there's no the comps don't matter. Really, it's really what are 2 people, maybe even 3, who are wealthy enough to spend this kind of money on a card. Where are they willing to go? How far into a bidding war are they willing to go? And so 1.5 million, 2.5 million, nothing would have surprised me in that range, even maybe even a little bit higher, because of the power of the PSA set registry and the competitive nature among many collectors to have the highest graded card. And I love how we're gonna take a total 180 on that statement right there when we it's shortly here. But Matt, what about you? 1.62 million. Were you following this auction? What did you think about it?
The card caught my eye because it's certainly a card that merits the grade. That's first and foremost. I don't think this is a buy where it's purely a registry buy and the card doesn't look the part. I think it merits the part. I don't think it would be out of place in a 9 holder, certainly. So I think it's a worthy high grade card. It's a function of one's budget, as Leighton was saying. If this 1.6 to someone is what 10,000 is to someone else, then hey, so be it. If that fits your budget, go for it. From my perspective, I would prefer to keep the difference, buy the 2 that's in REA now. There's a Memory Lane has an 8 that I think is every bit as beautiful as this. probably going to go for what, Leighton, you know better than me, maybe $1 million less. So for me, I rather put that money, for example, I'd rather have the 2 in REA and the golden pen signed 52 Topps mantle and maybe I don't know, 700,000 cash than that. So that's where it becomes a no-brainer to me. And if you're asking me how to curate a collection for 1.6, I'm not buying this card for 1.6. Right.
And I like how you
if
just
I'm Steve Cohen, I'll buy it for 1.6 because who cares? Right. So it's like Leighton was saying, it's hard to just answer that with one word or make it a binary great, not great scenario.
I like how you started talking about what you would rather do with that money, because also on REA right now, there is an amazing card. This one right here. This is an actual Babe Ruth rookie. It's important to keep in mind for everybody that the 33 Gaudy Babe Ruth cards are not rookie cards. This 1916 M101-45 Morehouse Baking is a Babe Ruth rookie card from 1916. It's a PSA 3.5. It's got the canceled stamp across the back, which I love. I actually prefer to have that than not. I think it tells more of a story. Now, this card is currently sitting at $505,000 plus a buyer's premium. So if it were to sell for this amount right now, and there's still how many 12 days left, so it's going to go for a little bit more probably, or maybe a lot more. But what would you rather have, Leighton? Where do you fall when it comes to this card? And when we were talking about it the other day, you had some really interesting thoughts on it. So can you speak to that now and let us know where you fall?
Sure. So first, I want to thank Brian Dwyer, president of REA. He hopped on Trading Card Therapy a few weeks ago. And I think ever since that point, I fell in love with this card. So when we were talking about this the other day, really, we started off the discussion talking about the 1933 Gaudy number 149 Babe Ruth that sold in Fanatics. But yet this Babe Ruth rookie kind of kept tugging on me in the sense of like, I can't believe, because I had Brian on the show and he was very, of course, modest about the estimate. I said, Brian, I think the card's going to sell for $1 million. And he said, I don't know. And so as we sit here today with the Fanatics example of the number 149, 8.5 that just sold for 1.62, I don't believe the Morehouse rookie in REA is going to sell for 1.26 million or more. I think it's going to sell for less. And so as I simply was talking with Jeremy offline the other day, Matt, I remarked almost like haphazardly and very casually, like, hey, I don't care what the Morehouse card sells for. If it sells for 1.62 or less, I would 100 times every time take the Morehouse Babe Ruth rookie instead of that 33 Gaudy Babe Ruth in 8.5. And to me, it's just no question in my mind. It is such a rare, iconic piece of not just baseball card collecting history, but like of the fabric of our society in terms of Babe Ruth and the rookie cards and of having this, immensely difficult back. And then, of course, you have the provenance and that wonderful story behind it. I just think adds up to me so much of a better proposition than that 33 Gaudy Ruth. And by the way, with the change left over to take Matt's line, I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a kick-ass example of the 33 Gaudy number 149 in a 2, even if I have to pay 40 grand, Matt, for a PSA 2.
Yeah, I agree. I would prefer to have the Morehouse than the $1.6 million 149. I'd prefer to have I'd prefer to have a sporting news back or a more common back and then not pay the premium even for the Morehouse. I'd rather continue to upgrade by downgrading and expand the collection that way and have more, because again, it's all a question of what's the governing philosophy of the collection in question. For me, the governing philosophy is having the images to look at, right? So if I could get a Ruth rookie, I want the cheapest, lowest grade that satisfies my eye version of that image. So for backs, now that said, but there are different people who the philosophy is, no, that back makes that special, and that's very different then. But I agree with you. I'd rather have this and a slew of other pieces and a nice vacation home than the red. But again, depending on one's budget, get them all. So it's, that's the big asterisk.
Let me ask you this, Matt, because you just said a lot of really interesting things there. You talked about you like having the image. So the front image is more important than a rare back for you.
for
And
me.
I love that. It makes me think of all the different Ty Cobb versions in the T206s. You can go for Leighton and I, on a previous episode of Vintage Spotlight, we went through the various rarities of the backs of T206s. And I'm sort of like you in that way. I want to have the common, the sweet cap or the Piedmont because they're cheaper. I'm going to get into a nice Cobb cheaper that way. As far as images go now on the front of the card, we've got the 144 Babe Ruth, the 33 Gaudi Babe Ruth red, and we've got this Morehouse M101. In my mind, in my opinion, this Babe Ruth card right here is much more pleasing to the eye than this card here. Now, if you sort of are a collector who just wants a key Babe Ruth card, because I don't think we can argue that these are both key cards. All 4 Gaudi Ruths are a key card. Any M1 1916 Babe Ruth card is a key card. How much for you, Matt, does the aesthetics matter compared to the rarity of a card? Because like Leighton said, Leighton wants the rarity of this card. For me, I would personally get more satisfaction owning any of the 33 Gaudis from a aesthetics perspective than this card here. This rarity to me is very important as well. But I don't know. I got to think about it for myself. Where do I land? Rarity versus aesthetics. What about you, Matt? And I want to hear from you, Leighton, as well. But let's start with Matt on this one.
It all falls under the rubric of personal preference. I have 2 cousins who are avid collectors. I once owned an M101 Ruth, and it was a beloved piece, and I was sad to let it go at the time. However, my cousins, whom I've been collecting with since I was 10, really prefer the Gaudis. For them, the color of them, the way they were seen when we were younger. I mean, when we were little kids, we thought the yellow Ruth 53 was his rookie card. Almost everyone. We were wrong, of course, but the point being that there's no wrong choice. It really comes down to personal collector preference. If there's anything pervasive in the hobby, I think that's flat out we can say is wrong. It's letting what others think, whether it's a grading company, whether it's collecting peers. You see so many people, what are the Babe Ruth cards to own? Well, the one you like, duh. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, so if you see on a list, like, these are the top 10 hip hop songs, well, are they yours? You know what I'm saying? Like, what does it mean that someone ranked them this? So, you see that on chat rooms a lot. What are the best Babe Ruth cards? Well, if you don't like the Frederick photo, you don't like the Frederick. I love it. My cousins could not give a lesser shit about the Frederick photo, right? So that's the thing, is someone will pay $500,000 for a Frederick photo. My cousins won't even bid a penny on it. So it's really, Jeremy, it really is the one you like. And you may like them all for different reasons. So for me, I take the approach of, I'd love to have an M101 again. I'd love to have a Fred photo. I'd love to have the Gaudis. So then I go on my budget. How can I get as many of them as I want? And that's where the eye appeal comes in.
What about you, Leighton? I know, because you mentioned it, you're the one that tipped me off to this sort of line of question and discussion. But what do you personally, because you have to look at it from 2 perspectives, Leighton. One, as a dealer, just collect vintage breaks, and another, you also collect. And I love when you show me a card that you're like, this one's for my son. Yeah, and I know we're going to see one of those later on in this episode. And I love when you show me that, because that's the collector in you. Where do you fall? Aesthetics or rarity? And approach this question any way you'd like, of course.
I think I put them both in a blender, because there's also the financial aspect of it. So in other words, as kind of Matt is saying, he's saying his cousins, no matter how valuable the Frederick photo Ruth is, they are not interested. But I think that's really cool. Like, they are not swayed by the importance or the value. They just recognize, totally great card, maybe even worth the money that it's selling for, but it's not for me. So, for example, I bring up Cy Young, and I love his portrait card in the T206 set. The other variations are decent, but I'll tell you, if you said to me, in terms of the ones that are achievable, meaning like I love the Just So Tobacco Cy Young, but it's like impossible. So in terms of the Cy Young, the E90-1, where he's in the Boston American, like across the that card to me, like, that epitomizes baseball, American history, and exactly what life was like in 1910. So to me, I don't care what that card is worth as long as it's affordable. And yet it has nothing to do with the investment possibility of it or anything of that nature. And of course, because we could probably talk for hours, my example of that card, which I don't have in front of me, is an authentic, because the lower grade examples I was being presented were just hideous. And then I came across an authentic example, and I know a lot of folks are confused by it, meaning they don't exactly know why their card's authentic. Is it bad? Is it good? And that's what's so beautiful about that particular card for me. It's all good because I want the card and I want the aesthetics of it. And so that's the best way I can answer it, Jeremy.
Yeah. Matt, do you have any response to that at all?
Only that the red E90-1 Cy Young, it's one of those cards where every time I see it, I'm like, do I get it? Because I love it. There's something about that card that just grabs me every time. But there's also, I need to stay in my guardrails, because if I start, I'm already bad enough with doubles and triples and quadruples of certain cards I love. I need to kind of stay in my collecting focus, because if I go for the Young, I'm going to go for something else. And then a Mathewson, how do I have those two and not have a Walter Johnson? There are many slippery slopes in collecting that are very costly.
Absolutely. And I just want to add this in because I think it's a really great public service message for collectors. With the holidays approaching, we often have a little bit of extra time on our hands. This is the time now to not only, of course, enjoy your collection, but also I was teasing Rich Miller, who I was just on with a little bit ago, about his collection from Sports Collectors Daily. Go through and challenge yourself. Pull out like 5 or 8 or 10 cards. You're like, you know what? I just don't need these anymore. And if they're worth $100 in aggregate, great. You now have $100 for your collection. If they're worth $1,000 in aggregate, then they're worth $1,000 to you to now go out and acquire things for your collection. So I just think it's like a really great time of the year because, of course, there's wonderful auctions being held literally almost every day. eBay's happening all the time. And with more time in our hands, I kind of feel like we kind of had that trigger button, ready to go to press an REA or any of the other great auctions that are coming up. And so we want to make sure that, as you were saying, stay in our lane, Matt. And sometimes that means kind of reassessing what we have and making sure that, we're being responsible with our collections as well.
Yeah, it's always, I find having a personal collection is a fluid. It's a fluid thing. I'm always going through and reassessing my love for cards. I allow myself to fall out of love with certain cards and to dispose of them, take those proceeds, put them into what I love at that time. And I think a lot of people have some trouble with that. But once you allow yourself to do it, it can open up a whole new world. You both mentioned staying in your lane. Matt, tell us a little bit about your lane. What is your lane in the hobby? Where do you focus? What do you love the most?
Well, just one other thing about what Leighton was saying, I call it pruning. You got to prune that garden, and this one's getting a little unruly over here. And what was I doing with those? Collecting lends to impulse buying, and there's something good in that impulse, whatever it was. There's a reason you bought that card, but then it's also great what Leighton was saying in the sense of my brother always tells me, he does with Jordan. He's a big Jordan collector. And he's always telling me, like, appreciate what you have, man. Appreciate what you have. Because with collecting, so much of it is the hunt, the pursuit. What do I want next? What do I need next? Right. And he's absolutely right. What you need to do is spend time with what you have, because you had a real positive, happy, it was like a love impulse to get that thing before, and you have it. So enjoy it. And as you spend time with it, some things will pop out that, I don't need that. I don't need that. So I just think that whole process is really important, Leighton. It's really healthy. It's really beneficial. It's really positive. You pivot from pining for what's next to like really being happy with what you've got. And that leads to gratitude and the whole. So what Leighton touched on is a really healthy experience. My lane is, it's a challenge to create and stay in a lane, because I love all cards and I can really go from pre-war all the way to the 80s, all inclusive. And I have in the past, I have made that attempt. That necessitated, along with observing the differences between cards in grades, that necessitated, wait a second, necessity is the mother of invention. So that led me to, wait, this is a beautiful 2. Let me get that. Let me turn that 7 into 5 more cards that are equally beautiful 2s, so I can look at all these images that I want to look at, right? So, but I'm forced then, but budgetarily, I tend to focus on Yankees, Ruth, Gehrig, DiMaggio, Mantle, Munson, Berra, Reggie, Donnie. But then once the 60s come along, I can go for all key cards, right? So where I really need to put the blinders on is Cracker Jack, Shoeless Joe, and Cobb, the Frederick Photo Ruths. That's where like the blinders come on. So it's, like for DiMaggio, love the V355, love it. But the 41 play ball reps him just fine. You know what I mean? Now budget goes up, go get a V355. So it's budget tends to govern and where to put those resources. You got to prioritizing, right? And then so for me, it became the holy grail was a centered 52 tops mantle and a signed 52 tops mantle. So again, if that was on the list, that was the first list, mission accomplished. That means I don't have a Cracker Jack Joe Jackson. You know what I mean? So it's welcome to life, man. That's life.
I got to say, I love 41 play ball. Joe DiMaggio is at the top of my want list right now. It's my number one wanted card. I'm watching them every month when they come up on the various auction houses. I've yet to find one in my budget that is the right copy for me. So help me out. Keep an eye open if you ever see one, Matt. And same to you, of course, Leighton. One of the things that I mentioned at the top of the show about you, Matt, is that, and you just mentioned it, you are looking for cards that fit your budget. And in order to do that, you need to go into lower grades in many cases. But there is an opportunity when shopping for cards in lower grades to find ones that are very, very strong for the grade and hopefully priced still within their grade point or maybe really close to it. And for myself, I was fooled, let's say, by the technical grade on grading on graded card slabs for many years, and I thought that they were always going to be right and correct and make sense. And then as I grew and I learned, and I really met a couple of people at one of the nationals in the late 2000s, I believe it was, a collector by the name of Brady Hill and another collector by the name of Jeff, who runs a booth called Card Country at the various nationals. I met these guys at the national, and Jeff really pounded it into my head to always look for cards that are strong for the grade. And that is my mantra now. And then, Matt, when I first came across you epitomized that approach to the hobby. So when I said earlier that you, along with a couple others, have inspired me in my collecting, I now love the instances where I'm able to find and acquire a card that is low grade, whether it's a 1 to a 3.5, let's say, low grade, but really punches above its weight class. To me, that's what I love to do now. And I find it's almost like a sport. Like that's what I would rather flex that. I would rather flex this LK line in a PSA 3.5 than an LK line in a PSA 9. I also can tell you, I think maybe with 95% certainty that I love this card as much or if not more than somebody who owns a PSA 9 in that card. It's not just about flexing the value, it's about flexing the savviness. And I think that being savvy that being able to hunt for cards that are strong for their grade is a function of experience, inspiration by certain people who you admire in the hobby, as I do, you among them, Matt, and having a good eye and just being able to find. So I really, really love that. And now, before I get back to you, Matt, Leighton, I want to ask you, because we talk vintage, we talk hobby on a regular basis now for several years. Are you noticing a trend at all? Like, are Matt and I the only, and Brady Hill and Jeff from Card Country, are we the only ones doing this? And I know there are others. I see them on Instagram. I follow them among other places. But Leighton, are you, because you're out there, you are boots to the ground on a regular basis, are you noticing more of a trend towards people who can even afford PSA 8s, but looking for PSA 4s or 5s or 3s that are really nice for the grade?
I am noticing a trend, Jeremy. It's a great question. And I think it's kind of like this underground community that's starting to become just a little bit more well-known. And I think, as collectors ourselves, we kind of get a chuckle out of, like, on the one hand, it's a good thing. On the other hand, it means that Red Ruth in a 2 is no longer going to be affordable. Sorry, Matt, to be the bearer of bad news. But I do see it very much happening in real time. I think there's a shift happening where, don't get me wrong, it's not like an 8.5 or an 8 or 9s are bad, but you mentioned it. And I think this is a great way to describe it. It's kind of becoming a sport. It's becoming a challenge, so that, hey, listen, if Steve Cohen wants to flash a Jackie Robinson rookie in a 9, it doesn't mean that we're all not going to like it. Or if Nat Turner shows off a super high grade of, a Hank Aaron rookie, we're all going to like it. But I'll tell you, there's nothing that is getting the kind of the juices flowing and the discussions moving when someone puts a Hank Aaron rookie in a 2 that looks like it could be an 8 or a 9. They spent a fraction of what the 8 or 9 just sold for. And then they proceed to list 11 different things they're going to buy with the money, and all of the other money that's left over, they're now buying a place in the Bahamas. And so, joking aside, Jeremy, I do see a movement, and I think at some point it's going to be a little bit more vocal than it is now, but everything takes time. But I absolutely feel the momentum.
Yeah, because I am much more impressed by Matt's Instagram page and 1956 Tops guy, Matthew, who's going to be an upcoming guest on our show. I'm much more impressed by their posts and showing their acquisitions than I am by somebody who's posting the PSA 8s and 9s of these vintage pre-war cards, or even post-war, super high grade, that the only reason that they got them, and this isn't a knock, I understand people like to collect high grade cards, but you got it because you could outbid everybody else. I am not impressed by your ability to outbid anybody. I am impressed by your ability to locate, identify, and acquire a low grade, high eye appeal card. That, you want to get a round of applause from me, that's going to get it. Simply posting a card that you spent, humongous money on, I'm not all that impressed by that. I think I'm happy for you that you got what you want. I'm also not somebody who is a big proponent of competing on the PSA set registry just for the sake of competing, where you'll go buy the next 9 that comes up, even though, maybe it was graded 25 years ago, and nowadays it would grade a 6 or a 7 if you're lucky, but back then it was a 9. I shouldn't say if you're lucky. Maybe we'll grade a 6, 7, 8, who knows, but maybe not a 9 anymore. That doesn't impress me really at all. And unless either of you have a comment on that, I want to
add one comment very quickly. And so I kind of want to make sure that we're recognizing this moment for what it is. I think it's really exciting for collectors, because now all of a sudden we've been empowered with this knowledge. Obviously, you need to have a little bit of money in your checkbook to do this. But now folks like Matt, collectors like us, Jeremy, we can go out there and no, we're not going to pretend that we're Steve Cohen. But as Matt's alluding to, I'm buying the card because it's aesthetically pleasing to me, not my neighbor, not my friend Jeremy, not Steve Cohen. And so I actually think that not only am I in agreement, Jeremy, that it may be even more impressive when folks like Matt or 1956 Topps Collection make those posts, but I think it's very inspiring for other collectors to see what's actually possible. And I just wanted to make that point because I think it's really cool.
Well, what I would add to that is, and a lot of interesting things to respond to. It is a sport. It is a sport because I think it's more of a win when I find the 2 that looks like a 5, or in some freak cases a 7. I think that's more satisfying to me as a collector from the hunt perspective. It's more satisfying to me in terms of being savvy with what I'm doing with my money in my collection. I think it's more impressive as a collector that I found this. And I think that it's also like a sport, and you're hitting the mistakes. I keep using this phrase, hitting them. It's like, well, that's what hitters do. They don't hit the pitcher's pitch. When the pitcher makes a mistake, they jump on it. That's what I do, right? It is a sport. It's like, oh, the system made a mistake. They made this Babe Ruth a 2. I'm hitting that, right? And now, of course, it is getting more and more as that 2. I thought that REA 2 of the Red Ruth was going to go for 2.5 money. I thought I would win it, and now I'm already out. And Leighton, as you were saying, there are, for example, I used to have those in 8s. I was someone that could buy the 8s, right? And I choose actively not to. I chose to take that 8 money, put it into a rare playing day sign 52, right? Because I'd rather have the true rarity that's born of Mantle signing it than the condition rarity of a card doctor taking a spoon to the corners, right? So that was, you can do it in terms of buy those 8s, but prefer to expand the collection into other areas, prefer to get the rarity. And I've never seen it more exemplified. The most responses I've ever gotten was I made this post where I took a 2 of the 144 Ruth. I don't know, did you ever see this one, Jeremy, and put it next to a 7?
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I think I've had more conversations about that one juxtaposition of 2 images than anything I've ever talked about in the hobby, because it just said that one picture really says it all. Is that 7 a flex, or is that 7 a self-own? So I think when you put certain car, like for example, that 8.5 for 1.6 next to that 2, I don't know. I'm clapping more for the guy who wins the 2.
There's the 2 right there, and the 8.5 is right there. So yeah, there's not a lot of difference between the 2 when you look at them at arm's length. They are both beautiful cards. There's a bit of a color variation, but they're both very. And I'm with you. That's what I said earlier. I'm much more impressed, and you're going to get a bigger round of applause from me by being able to take out one of those low grade, high eye appeal cards. And Matt, you talked about making the mistake and capitalizing on the mistakes. And there's a difference between a grading company making a mistake and a grading company grading a card based on the technical criteria, the technical approach to grading versus the eye appeal approach. And, you can have there are cards in PSA 2 holders and even 1 holders that can look like 8s and 9s from far enough away. Maybe the corners aren't exactly there, but everything else is. And I think this is, again, where the sport comes into play, because number one, you can capitalize on the mistakes that they're making when they just maybe, that whole cliche, the grader was in a bad mood. It was, you can win the sport by capitalizing on those mistakes, or by capitalizing on instances where eye appeal is not aligned with technical grade. And that leads me to that transition I wanted to make a few minutes ago, but I'm glad we had further discussion, which is we all have different tolerances towards the various condition flaws that are acceptable to us that will bring a card's grade down from a 7, 8, or 9 to a 1, 2, or a 3. We often talk about centering, corners, edges. Maybe a pinhole in a card brings the grade all the way down to something lower. And I want to ask you, Matt, and you, Leighton, after as well. But Matt, what condition flaws are you willing to give on in order to acquire a card that is in lower grade, like this PSA 2 Babe Ruth, which you coveted? And I can't see what the problems are. Maybe there's some light wrinkling somewhere, but
the back, glue residue on the back.
Is that what the problem is here?
Mm-hmm. See?
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about where are you willing to compromise on these low grade cards that you're adding to your collection?
Where I'd like to compromise most is on the back, where I'd like ideally glue residue, tape residue, even a spot of paper loss. Those are my best friends. That's what I want. If I can't get that, kind of like my 4.5 of the 52 Topps Mantle, that's ideal. That's going up from that 1-2 sweet spot where I like to be. That's where I think the pound for pound champs are. If I could find a 1 to a 2 that looks great, that has no obvious creases, wrinkles, etc., that's fantastic. But if you get into that 4 or 5 range, great centering I won't give on. I have to have that great image. Give me some corner wear. Give me a little wrinkling in the corners. That's like really faint spider wrinkles, sometimes they're called. That's what I like the most. That's where I want to see the wear. And that's where I like to collect.
Well, I want to just talk about wrinkles for a quick second, and because personally, one of my favorite card in my whole collection, I've been showing it off a lot lately, is my PSA 1 number 144 Babe Ruth. And this card, to me, it looks like it could easily be a 7. It's a 1, but it does have some faint wrinkles coming down right beside him in this area here. And I can't even see them right now. I have to catch it under the right light. So wrinkles and creases were always some of the biggest detractors on cards. Like when I in the early 90s, creases were the biggest faux pas a card could have. But I'm becoming more forgiving when I can't even see them. Yeah, it might bring the technical grade down, but the eye appeal, you can't beat it. So how do you deal with that?
Doesn't show up in the light, right? Like it all depends. Not all creases and wrinkles are the same. I'm sure Leighton would agree. Like I have some ones that have a crease if I'm tilting in the light, but you put it on a stand or in a wall case, and it's like they're gone. And those wrinkles are another collector's best friend. They're like magic wrinkles. Like they're there and they kept the price down, but if I can't see them, do they exist?
Right.
It's like I've got a 151. I got a 1 here of this dandy I just put on my Instagram. It's got a wrinkle in the light, but I'm not looking at it like, I'm looking at it like this, and there's no wrinkle there. So if it's not there now, it's not there. So bank error in my favor. It's great.
Okay, let's go to you, Leighton. Same sort of question, and I agree with Matt. To me, it's centering is very important, but above centering for me is focus and just the front overall. I want a nice, clear image without much scuffing or fading. I want good, bold color. That's what's important to me. Leighton, where are you willing to compromise on a technical flaw in the card, a condition issue that brings the grade down, but you are still very happy with owning that card in your personal collection?
Sure. So 2 things I wanted to mention. Number one, and this comes from, it was my first job in the industry. I worked for, actually it's my second job before I started Just Collect. I worked for Leland's, the auction house, about 20 years ago. And a gentleman by the name of Ben Cavallo, maybe rest in peace, he was a consignor of Leland's. And he had bought in the 1970s a scrapbook from one of the epic flea markets that were up in the Boston area. And in the scrapbook were hundreds and hundreds of tobacco cards. And so if you had to ask me, what is like my ideal situation, kind of what you're alluding to, Matt, if you give me a fresh scrapbook where the cards have not been exposed to light and they've been removed, but they have, just as you were alluding to, just maybe spots of paper loss, on the back or abrasions from glue. I have a few T206s. Maybe I'll post it if I can find them handily. The cards look on the front like they are mint. And really, they bring a smile to my face every time I see them. They're not worth a lot of money. They're not even any big name players. But Jesus criminy, this is how they looked coming out of the pack of cigarettes in 1910. And that is what I want to recreate. So I agree with all the points you're making. The more you can limit things to the back, I did read stats of the cards growing up, of course, and I still do. But the first thing you look at is the front of a card. And so to me, that is the number one type of low grade, but yet high appeal card that I covet for my collection.
Matt, any response before I?
No, that's the dream when we could find it, and then you move on from there, right? So they're really rare. They really are rare in their own right, and they provide tremendous value. And further, what Leighton was saying earlier, they talk about we were in an era of peak TV. I think that we're in an era of peak great cards being available. We have what look to our eyes like 6s and 7s in 4 holders. We're seeing. We could find 3s that look like 6s. I mean, it's a great time to be, free of that. Again, what do you look instead of a sheer money flex or a flip flex to flex a savvy eye that's looking through this sea of cards that's coming, washing ashore, constant this ebb and flow. There's so many auction houses right now, and for the keen and tireless and savvy eye out there, there's some great wins for the collection. We're seeing more and more of these cards. We're seeing so many 6s that I swear to God look like a 9 in a case. And I'm looking at it close and under a loop to go, why is this not an 8 or a 9? That's when you go, why, how is this a blank? Like I showed a 6.5 to someone who came over my house yesterday. I guarantee if I crack this one card out, it will come back a 9, maybe even a 10 sometimes. I'm not going to do it because I like it in the 6.5 holder. But he goes, how is this a 6.5? Whenever the sentence starts with how is this it's a great card. Keep it at all costs, right?
I love cards like that. That's when I feel like I've won the game, when somebody looks at one of my cards and says, how is that? Because I know that I paid a lot less than I would have had to have it in that actual fill in the blank, the 9 or whatever it is. But as our tolerance lowers towards things like minor wrinkles, a little bit of paper loss on the back of the card, these sorts of things, I find that is some of that trend and movement, Leighton, that we talked about a little bit earlier. But there's another level of flaws and condition issues the card can have. Things like writing on the back of the card. We know that kids back in the day would put their name on it, or they'd put the stat of a player, or they'd number, whatever they would do. Is that something? And with PSA, they will put a qualifier. They will put, PSA 3 MK for mark. There's a mark on the card. People generally in the hobby avoid PSA slab cards with qualifiers like the plague, for whatever reason. Yet I once met somebody at a Cleveland National probably 10 years ago who all they were doing was looking for PSA 9 OC cards because they felt they were getting a PSA 9 card at a steep discount. And I always remember that. And these were young guys. These were guys in their 20s or 30s, that just had a bit of money. And I was always impressed by that approach. But Leighton, where do you fall when it comes to kind of some writing? And do you distinguish between pencil and pen if it's on the back of the card? Do you shy away from the qualifier, the MK qualifier? What do you think?
Well, great question. We touched upon this briefly the other day, and I have an interesting thought on it. So growing up, and even probably for the last 10, 20 years, I hated writing on the back of my cards for so many different reasons. But as my tastes have changed, some maturity has set in, I started thinking about it, believe it or not, when I started buying postcards. Because when you buy postcards, many postcards have writing on the back. And then I started realizing that the writing on the back of the postcards that I not only didn't mind, but actually enjoyed, was the writing that kind of told a story. So whether it was a little bit of a letter, whether it be they wrote down the statistics for that particular player, or they loved that player, they hated him, whatever the case may be. If you just had like gibberish and doodling, that to me, I still hate it. But I'll tell you, I've now added some cards to my PC that have writing on the back, but the writing has to do with the actual card. So like I said, it's mentioning a statistic or that team's record that year. And it's kind of telling a little bit of a story, even if it was just for a split second in that particular individual, likely a child, time growing up. And so you get a fantastic discount because the card now sells for tremendously less. And if the MK qualifier actually bothers you from PSA, just submit it to SGC where they have no qualifiers. Now they will grade it appropriately. So if it's a 2, it might still be a 2, but you're not going to have an MK next to the 2. And so that is just, to me, kind of like my quick take on writing and how I've evolved with my tastes and preferences for writing on the back of cards.
Pen versus pencil. Do you have any difference in approach to those?
It's interesting. If we had to really geek out, right, you could say like, oh, pencil's better because it's lighter, but I actually kind of feel the opposite. I think pencil on a cardboard card is kind of ugly. But if you have a nice fountain pen or a nice writing instrument that was bold and, kind of interesting to look at, like, I've seen ink that's green on the back of cards look kind of cool. If you said to me that same everything was written in pencil, I don't think it would look as good. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. I always often say that I want my cards to have lived a life. I want my vintage cards to actually look vintage. I don't get any satisfaction from a vintage card that looks like it was just pack pulled. I think, listen, I understand it, and we all grew up hearing buy the best you can afford. I get all that. But for me, I like my vintage cards to look a little bit look their age. I don't want them trash, but I want them to look have a little bit of a an identity that lines up with when they were produced, and a writing on the back of a card. That's what kids did back then. We're not sitting here advocating that everyone has to go start collecting cards with writing on the back. We're just simply, opening our own eyes and others to the fact that maybe it's not the end of the world, and that MK qualifier isn't the death knell for a card. Listen, I don't know if I have any in my collection. I don't think I do, but I think I'm open to the option now of adding a card that might have that qualifier that has some writing on the back of the card. Matt, where do you fall on writing on a card? How do you approach it?
What you're talking about is, natural beauty versus a lot of plastic surgery and facelifts. And so, it's when you talk about looking the part, looking like it's lived through time. What Leighton is speaking to is, we're just the custodians of these things. 100 years from now, we're gone. Some other collector will hopefully have our cards and be enjoying them. So I think in the same way, it's nice to see remnants of the card's journey through time, whether that remnant is some wear, whether that remnant is, it was in a scrapbook, because someone took the time to do that with Leighton's tobacco cards, whether it's someone having written something on the back. That's evidence. We're all together in this, right? We're all humans who like the sport, who like following it. And that card was, for example, I just got the Dan D mantle that I love so much. This thing has the potato chip grease all over the back. And I'm like, someone's hand was in that bag. And, so, that's part of it. So I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. And again, I'd rather have a card that exhibits some form of that natural journey through time than the Botoxed, overly Botoxed, bleached. So, look, there are high grade Cracker Jacks that we see. There are high grade, I'm just using those as an example, but you can look at a card and see it's had the plastic surgery. It's been soaked. It's too bright. It's too, and I rather have it the other way.
Yeah, you're right. That's what I was talking about when I said I don't want a card that looks like it was freshly pack pulled, here 60 plus years later. Bleach is something, or recolored, whatever it is, lightened up. I do not enjoy those at all. I used to own a PSA 7 Jean Beliveau rookie from 1953 that I also owned a PSA 5, and I thought I'm going to upgrade to this 7. And when I had both in hand, I looked at them. I thought, wow, this 5 is just exhibits exactly what I'm looking for in a card. The 7 looks a little too nice for me. I don't know. I don't know if that was ever bleached or soaked or what. I'm going to get out of that, and I'm going to keep my 5, which just exhibits an age that it looks its age, but it's still a beautiful, beautiful copy. So I think that's interesting stuff right there, guys. We're going to move into maybe the final portion of the episode here and talk about and share some of our pickups. Matt, I did ask you to bring a couple cards. You mentioned a few along the way. Would you be willing to maybe put a few, just lift up and show us a couple cards from your collection?
You know how good the camera's going. This is the card that I just picked up that I was talking about. I'm going to get a glare. Maybe there's less glare there.
There you go. It's a good spot.
So this is a 1. The centering is fantastic. The corners are more 8-ish. And the back just has the grease. It's just got that potato chip grease. I think I really love this. And I love it because it's just such a great photo of the Mick. This is a 1951 photo of him, actually. It's the same photo from the Stahlmeyer. So I'm a big fan of this card. And again, it just has that, it's kind of, it reminds me of what Leighton was talking about his tobacco cards, that, there's evidence on the back and the front sort of resembles what it must have been. And then this is another one I got fairly recently, also a 1.
Oh boy.
I mean, just the lowest grade we can have, and just really presents beautifully. And it's a 1 because someone affixed it, and someone affixed it. If you could see, there's a strip of paper loss right where there's no printing. So someone really did me a solid on this card. So again, another 1. This is one that I was really excited about that you've been for, because this is just a 3, and you can see it's a very old flip, but the centering is fantastic and the image quality is really fantastic. It's just, there's no shadowing of any sort.
Matt, I'm going to send you my address. Can you just send me that card, please?
Yeah, exactly. And then we're talking about, this is the card I was telling you guys about. This is what Leighton was talking about too, about a front. And then there's the back with just, in the 4 corners of the back, you could see where the glue was. But the front, this is the one that was on my Instagram. That's kind of like I'd say it's more like a 7 front. And then I've been, we didn't talk about this, but then I've been after 9s that are 100% 10s, right? That's another great way to save money. And when I go into the 80s stuff, why spend $4,000 on a 10 of this card? I've owned them. I know what a 10, again, it's like, I can, right? It's not like, oh, I can get the 10, but this is so much better than any 10 I've owned because the centering was great. So,
Matt, I love that. That's how I've been collecting my 80s rookies. And I just wanted to say, even though, we've all opened up a lot of 80s and 90s packs, because my other company, Vintage Breaks, participates and often does these daily and weekly breaks of 80s packs. It kind of re-showed me, Matt, actually how difficult, the quarter is not so much, but how difficult it actually is to get a centered 1984 Donruss Don Mattingly out of a pack. Forget about if it's a 10, just a centered copy of a Tony Gwynn Topps rookie. And so, Matt, what happened was years ago, as we started opening these in volume, I'm like, OMG, this is crazy. I don't need a $3,000 Tony Gwynn Topps rookie, but I'll happily buy a $200 9 that looks just as good as a 10. And that to me was like one of the cards I loved growing up.
No,
great way to collect.
They're there. Here's the wrinkle we were talking about. Like the centering on this card, fantastic. The image, fantastic. And it has a wrinkle that I got to put in a certain position. But I shit you guys not, had a $13,000 8. This card and the 8 next to each other, 3 feet away. This was superior to the eye because I couldn't see that wrinkle, but I could see that this was dead centered and the 8 was tilted. And I could see that the print quality on this 1.5 was superior to the 8. So there's no question that from an everyday viewing standpoint, that was superior. So that's kind of what I've been picking up. And then I've been, really again into even just card like this. Just I remember how hard it was to get this card looking nice out of a pack. So I've been all over lately. I've basically been in the 80s fun zone, and then doing the usual high eye appeal, low grade, and then this is that 6.5 I was telling you about that I'm so excited about. I for years only collected this set, so I know this set, and this is the best one of these I've ever seen, and I've owned like multiple 9s. And this card is like a 9-10. I've looped it. I don't know what's going on, but I think it's so much better to keep in the 6.5. So yeah, I'm going to send Leighton. I'm going to send you some high res scans of this thing. And
please, I'd love to see it.
So many people look at it, we can't figure out what's going on. So, but again, like Jeremy was saying, it's so cool. How is this a 6.5? I had a friend over yesterday. He's got the magnifying glass out. He's zooming in on it through his phone. He's like, how is this a 6.5? And so it's just a great thing to collect. So that runs the gamut on what I've been doing lately.
So if you're listening on podcast, Matt just showed us the last card he showed us was a 1975 Topps Nolan Ryan and mini in a PSA 6.5. He showed us a 1986 Topps Eric Davis in a PSA, was that a 9?
Yeah.
And before that was the 57 Topps Mickey Mantle in a PSA 1.5. So come on, go check out the YouTube channel and you can have a look at these cards, all these cards for yourself. Leighton, what have you picked up lately that you'd like to share?
So I'm going to share one card, and before I share it, I was curious, Matt or Jeremy, or for our listeners, if anyone else feels the same. So I am totally on the same page as far as the eye appeal and collecting. This has been such a fun episode, but I'm going to throw one little wrinkle in it, and I realize that I have an advantage because I literally do this full time. This is what I do to eat. So one of the nice things that comes with owning a business where you professionally go out and try to find baseball card treasure is you buy a lot of ungraded collections. So I love, remember, I said this a little bit ago, even though, of course, I want to get the highest grade possible, sometimes when I get a card back from PSA, it's in a certain grade. I'm like, I think it should grade higher. And I just know that this is a card that I'm going to have and I'm going to give to my son, Crosby, who's 9. And so I find, especially lately, that I love everything we've been saying today. And those are the kinds of cards I like to collect, meaning high eye appeal, but a lower grade. But with the added caveat that if you actually have the good fortune to have bought it fresh from the collector who collected it themselves, and then you're the one to grade it, and there is no intermediary other than the person who owned it as a kid and you, and it only goes to the grading company and comes back. Well, that, folks, is what I'm presenting to you right now. This is my 1953 Topps Jackie Robinson PSA 4.5 that just came back from PSA. And if you look at the card, it might be a smidge off center left to right, but the card looks near mint. And I'm going to give this to my son. It's going to stay in my collection. And I've always loved this card. And my son and I only know a few ball players together. And one of the books that we read about baseball when he was a young kid was about Jackie Robinson. It was called Jackie Robinson and Me. So he knows who he is. And I, of course, love the eye appeal of this card, but with the added bonus that I actually got it graded. So I know what it looked like in its raw form. And I think we'd all agree it's got pretty decent eye appeal for a 4.5.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, certainly. Beautiful.
So that's my pickup.
That's all. It's so great that you get to buy these. I envy you guys because I have some friends that are in that business, and to find some of these collections raw and therefore who pulled it out of the pack. I was able to do that with my 2 biggest cards to find out who had them. It's so cool because cards change hands so many times in our hobby. I mean, if you see a card that's just won and someone's like, "This is my grail, I love this," and then it's up for sale like the next week, and so they move around a lot. So to know it went from a pack puller and you met the person and then now it's in your collection, that's really rare. That's great.
That is the best. All right, I'll finish us off with a few pickups. I'm going to start showing this is a 1948 Baseball's Great Hall of Fame exhibits Babe Ruth that I managed to pick up. This came to my booth at the Toronto Expo, and I didn't know anything about it. So what did I do? Took a picture of it. I sent it to my friend Leighton. I said, "Leighton, what do you think this is? What should I do? Should I pick it up? What's the right price?" He gave me some advice, and I acted on that advice. And I purchased the card from the person who brought it to me in Canada at the Toronto Expo. It was a neat piece. It's not something that's going to stay in my personal collection. This is something that I'm going to make available eventually and, try and find the right home. But I thought I was the person to do that because I do kind of, I do all sports, and obviously Canada and Toronto Expo is mostly hockey. I felt it was sort of my duty to find it a better home eventually, but I'm going to enjoy it during the time that I do own it. And then I'm going to show quickly 5 cards that this is a great story. I went to one of our local monthly shows here in Calgary just last Saturday, and I went to a booth, a gentleman who I've known for a long time. He is in his mid 70s. He's been collecting all the Topps baseball sets since he was probably, I don't want to say a kid, but for many, many years. He's been to all the nationals. He's one of these guys you see flipping through binders, looking for the raw copies to fill in his binders back home. He eventually decided it's time to start getting out of these cards. He's getting to be older. So he had the best players graded. And I walked up to the booth at this monthly show, and he was just starting to put them out, and him and his son were there pricing them. And I was like, wow, this might be an opportunity for me to add some really great cards to my collection. And I acquired 5 from him. And I started off by trying to get the cards that were the best centered, because they just look so good. So very quickly, the oldest one, 1954 Topps, the Al Kaline rookie card. Now this grades out a 3.5, but to me, it looks like a 9. It's just super, super clean. Oftentimes I will take my loop and look at these cards to see what's wrong with it. I don't even want to really, but it's just some corner issues. Maybe there's something else I can't even find, but that's a 3.5, and I just absolutely love it. And then 4 cards from 1957 Topps. This Hank Aaron, beautifully centered copy. It's a PSA 3. Got a little bit of some light surface issue right there. Corners are not perfect, but this thing is a 3. I think 15 years ago, this would have graded 6 or a 7. And then I'll save the rookies for the end. This card has grown on me in a major way since I picked it up. I've always admired them from afar, but the Yankees power hitters, the Mantle and the Berra in a PSA 3, guys. Like, look at the centering. The image is wonderful. I just love how balanced this card is. What a wonderful piece. And I'm a huge Yogi Berra guy, so to put him with Mickey Mantle, you can't go wrong. And then a pair of Robinsons. Frank in a 3. I mean, amazing. And then Brooks in a 2. It's just unbelievable to me that these cards exist in this low grade, and I was able to pick up the 5 of them from these aren't fresh to the hobby, but these are freshly graded, and the first time they've been made available since this gentleman in his 70s put these sets together over the past, call it 40 years. So I'm ecstatic to add those, and I think all of them are going to remain in my personal collection except for the Hank Aaron. That's one that I might be willing to move because it's not his rookie. And but the rest, very happy with having in my my semi-permanent PC. I say semi-permanent because nothing is permanent; everything is temporary in this world. But those were my pickups, guys. Any thoughts?
Great,
tremendous.
No,
keep telling me how great they are. That is
dream. You walked in as an original owner. Collection is selling, centered, beautiful, low grade cards,
like low grade, high eye appeal. Yeah, Jeremy, I'm going to be at that show next month, buddy. You're going to have competition.
Exactly, box them out.
We talk about the sport. I feel like I won that game, and I had to drive through a horrible snowstorm to get there last Saturday. It was white out. And you know what? It ended up being worthwhile. So very excited to add those to the collection, guys. Listen, we're going to wrap up. This has been great, Matt. Thank you very much for joining. I always love talking hobby with you. We've had the pleasure of doing it a few times over the past few years. You bring such a great insight, a great approach. And I think that you, along with a couple others, have, as I said, have inspired me over the years. And I feel like we are continuing to let people know that, the flex doesn't have to be in having the most money. It might be in having the best eye, maybe being at the right place at the right time sometimes, like I was, to get these cards. But I know that, like I said earlier, I think all 3 of us believe, like Leighton with you and the Jackie you showed us, Matt with you and all the cards you just showed us, and myself and these cards, we love these cards as much, if not more, than the people who can just go buy the PSA 9s and 10s. And we can often afford those cards in higher grade, but we get more pleasure out of the low grade, high eye appeal. Leighton did affirm he is seeing a trend in that direction. I am coming to be acquainted with more and more people who are collecting that way. I think it's a wonderful thing. Final words we'll start with you, Matt. Final comments on the episode.
I was just going to say you're too right, as evidenced by that REA2. I think the party's over for finding these things slipping through the cracks. So I've never been more wrong. It's a bittersweet thing, because on one hand, I'm happy for the cards, and I'm happy that so many people are putting their eye over what technical and arbitrary criteria say. On the other hand, it's like we're all each going to be losing a lot more of these cards at auction. So
as more and more people,
it's a bittersweet situation, and that card at REA is proving it right now.
Yeah. Leighton, anything you want to mention before we sign off?
Wonderful episode, Matt. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think one of the lessons that, I'm taking away, and I think all of us should, we were alluding to it earlier, is we should be grateful with the Thanksgiving holiday coming upon us, grateful for what we have versus what we don't have. And that's just not only about baseball cards, but about our lives.
And guys, if you are watching on YouTube, keep in mind these Vintage Spotlight episodes are available on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. Please subscribe, leave a review. We greatly appreciate it. We'll be back again in the near future with another episode, everybody. With that, this episode of the Vintage Spotlight is now over. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Matt, for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Matt.